This is Tracy Reagan, CEO of OpenMake Software. The demo you're about to see is performed by Steve Taylor, our Chief Architect and co-founder. He's going to show how Jenkins, Blue Ocean, and DeployHub can work together to build out a CI/CD process which includes continuous deployments all the way to production. So DeployHub focuses on the continuous deployment process, moving code to production, driven by continuous delivery. So if you look how most developers build out their CI/CD process, they do so with products like Jira, Bugzilla, Git. Most of the products are open source or fairly low cost and fit in within a development team's budget. But when it comes to the build, package, deploy process, it mainly relies on scripts. And this can be a problem, particularly for the package and deploy pieces. And that problem is that the developer-written deployment script is not always accepted by the production team. And it creates a process whereby the binaries to be deployed are put into a staging area, and then the production team makes a decision when they want to move that out to the production environments. What we often find from customers is when we talk to them about continuous deployments is that they are suspicious of what's in the developers' deploy scripts. They know that they've been used for their development deployments. They may have been modified for testing, but when it comes to production, they tend to want to write their own scripts. And when we had a waterfall process, this worked, but now with Agile and a DevOps process that's trying to shift left, we have to fix this particular trust issue with production, and that's a focus for DeployHub. So what DeployHub does is it provides a repeatable process of doing deployments from development through QA and production. The application package is built by developers, and the environments for QA and production are managed by those teams. And the application package can adapt across the continuous delivery pipeline, allowing the CI/CD process to perform continuous deployments. When we first looked at this market, we realized that there was a gap in the continuous deployment space. And the gap is due to the high cost of application release automation solutions. Our competitors charge quite a bit for these types of tools, and they don't fit easily into a project team's budget. So that means that the project team goes and instead of using automation to do continuous deployments or even continuous delivery at test and dev with an automation tool, they write the scripts, and therefore we have the problem. We have been getting some good industry recognition in this year's Gartner Magic Quadrants for the application release automation. They pointed out that DeployHub had strong integrations with Jenkins, and it made it a compelling option for companies who are looking to extend investment in Jenkins. And on that note, I am going to turn it over to Steve to do the demo. Steve?
So let's get started here with the demo. So one of the things is that we've recognized that Agile DevOps is a practice of shifting more of the operational responsibilities left to the developers. And that ends up being the lion's share of the work around that shift is software deployments. DeployHub facilitates this shifting, providing developers, operation teams, a centralized tool for collaboration, transparency, and trust. So we're going to first show you how a developer is going to interact with DeployHub and how they declare their application. So I've logged into DeployHub and I've gone to an application. The application we're working with right here is the Uptime More for Tomcat. We're looking at the components that are assigned to that application. We have two components. One is Uptime. This is a WAR file that we're going to be modifying and delivering, deploying out to our endpoints. The second one is the infrastructure level component. This infrastructure level component is brought in from our Ansible Galaxy roles. So like Tracy said, we integrate with Ansible. We include about 4,000 infrastructure level components that developers can consume when they're drawing out and making their blueprint for how their application is going to be packaged together and deployed. So I have a couple over here, Nginx, AMPQ. Those I could just drag out, add that into my application if I needed that as part of my definition. So our goal is to give that overall blueprint of how an application is configured. Now, let's go ahead and go into one of our components here. And at the component level, we actually go through and specify a type. The component type enables us to signify where this component is going to be delivered to. So it could be an endpoint that is the database server, a load balancer, a web server, an application server. Any of those types of endpoints, we're going to map this component to go to that endpoint type, endpoint component type. So it gives us an easy way to add on when we do our deployment. From development, we may have one server or virtual machine that's acting as both a database as well as an application server. When we get to QA, we may split it into an application server has its own instance, own virtual machine, and the database has its own machine. So when we do our deployment, we're going to map the component to be targeted to the right endpoint at that time. Now let's go back to our application. We'll take a look at some more of the configuration that we're able to do at the application layer. So at the application layer, we also have attributes that we can assign to that application. So here I've defined the database connection string. We're actually consuming another variable called DB connection. That's going to be, that value is going to be substituted at the deployment time. So it makes it easy for us to be able to specify and attach attributes to the components, to the application. So when we deploy, we're going to dynamically pick up what is needed through the pipeline. One of the things that we have also with an application is where is it going to be deployed to? So in this case, I have my uptime war for Tomcat is going to be deployed to the Tomcat, the uptime dev environment, the integration, production, and testing. So these are my available environments that I can actually target this deployment to. Now that's the association that we make between an application and the environment. Each environment will have different number of endpoints in it, and we'll get into that in a second here. But at this level, we have our components that are associated to an application, the application associated to the environment, and our attributes associated to all that. So we're creating that, like I said, that blueprint of everything that's needed to do a deployment for that application. Now let's take a look at the other side of the house. That's going to be the data center side. And let's go over to our endpoints. Actually, I'll go over to our attributes here, since we're talking about the attributes. So here you can see our database connections that I populated here. At deployment time, this is where we grab that value. Other values that we're pulling in are defined at the environment level as well. So each environment, if I look at my testing environment, we'll have a different database connection string for that. So it gives us an easy way to go ahead and provide environment-specific attributes, store those at the environment level. There is another layer that you can have, which is also at the server level. each individual server can have attributes that are specific to that. So I could actually move the port number. If I had one machine that had a specific port number that it needed to use, I could actually move that down to the endpoint level. So let's go ahead and take a look at what is contained in our environment here. So in our testing environment, we have 4 endpoints. If we go back up to production, we have 10 endpoints that we're working with. So just like we had at the application layer, the component type, if we go into an endpoint, we can see that these endpoints accept specific component types. So these servers here, these endpoints are going to be able to accept the application file component type. So this gives us that mapping of which parts of an application go to which endpoints. So it makes it very easy and enables us to scale without having to do any scripting. There's no scripting needed in order to move from one server in development out to 1,000 servers in production. That's going to happen through this mapping process. Let's go ahead and go back up to our environment. For each environment, there's a calendar that's associated with that environment. This allows us to control when we're going to do deployments, and also allows us to control when we want to stop deployments. So I can actually block the time slot here from 8 to 10:30 tomorrow for any deployments to occur by making it unavailable. So the calendars come in 2 forms. They come in the open for business form, and then they also come in I'm closed for business. And then the open for business, you basically go in and create calendar events that say make it unavailable. The closed for business calendar says I need to have specific time slots opened up for me to do my deployments. So if you don't want anything going out to production, you set up the production calendar closed for business until somebody goes out there and creates a time slot for that to occur. What this means for the continuous delivery pipeline is the production control teams, the operations center, project managers, QA managers can control what's happening to their environment. Because there's a calendar that's specific for each environment, that owner of that environment gets to control what's happening for it. So if there's 2 weeks of testing going on, the QA manager can block out QA from getting any new deployments. What this does is the CI/CD pipeline keeps chugging along, and as the pipeline comes across to the testing, it will actually check the calendar and say, nope, it's closed for business. We're going to have to stop here, and we'll end that pipeline transition there. So it makes it very easy to control what's happening throughout the life cycle, through the pipeline life cycle. So let's go ahead and we're going to jump over to deploying our application. So I'm going to actually go back to our application here, and we're going to be working with our continuous deployment pipeline. I'm going to go, we're going to make a look at, here's the pipeline. Here's our Jenkins file. One of the things that we've done is we've actually populated this GitHub project with not only the information about the Jenkins pipeline, but also everything about what's going on with the application itself. So if we actually go over to the wiki for this, we're pulling in all the information from DeployHub and associating it to the same project that our pipeline is in. You can see here that version 8 is not approved. So I'm actually going to version 8. I can look at the history. I can see that it was deployed this morning out to development. And here are the components that are associated with that. We have the 2 components. I could actually jump over to that. And here's our Jenkins output. So right from there, we can get right to our Jenkins output for that log. So it makes it very easy for us to see what's going on at that level. I'm going to go ahead and we can see here that this application is unapproved. We're actually going to go in and approve it to kick off the pipeline. So let's go ahead and before I do the approval, let's look at the application itself. So this is the application I've deployed to development. You can see that it's blue, the header, and we're on build 55. So that's the Jenkins build number. If you look at this is our integration stage of the pipeline, or at 53 we have the TL, and then for testing we have the 53 in TL, and same with production. So we're going to take this blue one, build 55, and move that out through the pipeline. Let me go ahead and approve this. We'll say good to go. And what this is going to do is I just made a commit to this this GitHub project. So what that's going to enable us to do is we're going to actually go and trigger our pipeline, because the pipeline is actually looking at the that GitHub project. So we'll see here in a few, I have it on a minute timer for it to loop back around and check for changes to the pipeline. So we'll get a deployment going here any second. So we're currently at 65. We should see a 66 come in here at any moment. But while we're waiting for that to happen, let's go back over to DeployHub and show you some additional features of what's happening when we do a deployment. So I'm going to go to a previous build. So I'm going to look at version 7 here, and I'm going to look at the timeline. And we're going to go ahead and look at one of the deployments that we did in the past here. Wait for this to load up. And we're going to go to our feedback loop. Now, the feedback loop gives us a lot of information about what is happening as part of our deployment process. So what we do is we grab from end to end the information about what's happening in our build. So everything, I'm going to point out there's some things on here that are part of the pro version. Some are from the open source version. So if you look at the web app runner, move this down a little bit. The web app runner, remember, was our infrastructure layer component. This came from a Jenkins build number 3. And it was deployed out to all these endpoints. This is typically what the open source version of DeployHub is going to look like. It's going to give you that association between the Jenkins build and the version, that component that it built, and where that component ended up going. Now, if you look at the Uptime 7.1, this one has some more information associated with it, and this is more along the lines of the Pro version. So at the Pro version, we're able to pull in change requests. These can be Jira tickets, GitHub issues, Bugzilla. We're going to be adding on ServiceNow shortly to be included as one of the data sources for change requests, tickets, issues, that type of tracking. From there, we also have our build. Let me zoom in a little bit. This is build 53 that we did that created that component. We have the actual source code commit, and then the actual source code file that was changed. So we know that there was a change made to this source code file. This is the commit that was associated with that. It triggered build 53. From there, we created version 7 or updated version 7 of our component, and then that went all the way out to all these endpoints. These here are the environment and our application. So this is going to be this information from start to finish is something that we can push over to DevOptics. So information about what builds, what Jenkins builds actually ended up on which endpoints, we can provide that to you and give you that insight into what's occurring from start to finish, from cradle to grave. Let's go ahead and go back over to Jenkins here, and we can see that we're running along now. We've done our integration. So we deployed version 8 out to integration. We'd ran our test cases. Our test cases were successful. And because our pipeline is defined to not only do a deployment, but also integrate test cases, our test cases came back clean, and that enabled us to move on to the next stage of the pipeline. So if we look at testing, we'll see the same level where we went and deployed out to testing, ran our test cases, did a few more test cases, and then we were good to go. So this is giving us that automatic movement from the development change that was approved out to the production environment. So if we actually look at our servers here, remember 55 was development. This is the development server. We go to integration, do a refresh here. We got our 55 in integration. Let's go ahead and look at testing. Testing's up to date, and you can see that we've been running just 94 seconds. And then we get to production. And production hasn't deployed to this server. One of the things that we're able to do as part of this deployment process is to do rolling deployments with just by enabling a checkbox. So we can actually roll through all the servers sequentially. For example, taking down our Tomcat cluster. So we started with server 1, deployed to that, let that one get started back up, then went to server 2, and then server 3, and so on. So that's one of the things that we're able to do as part of our deployment process, is not only do them in parallel, but also do them sequentially for those types of applications that need to be rolled out in like a clustered environment. Because DeployHub is agentless, we can also work with other types of endpoints, such as Docker containers, serverless environments like in AWS, routers, appliances, weird operating systems like AS400, the mainframe. We're able to deploy to all those environments in a consistent and repeatable fashion across that pipeline. Okay, production just ended. Let's go ahead and go over to production, do our refresh, and we got version 55 there. Now, one of the things that most people want to do is say, okay, well, it didn't work. Let's go ahead and roll back. So I'm actually going to, if I do my refresh here, we can see version 8 has made it all the way up to production. And if you look at our wiki page, we can see that version 8 is now approved and has been moved to production. So we have that full history. If we actually go through, we have that history trail of everything that was achieved through the deployment process. So it's a nice place to keep everything centralized as part of the deployment process. But let's go ahead and roll back So we're going to go ahead and roll back to a previous version. So DeployHub has built into it the capability of managing the versions. So we have a version control engine for deployments as part of DeployHub. So I can pick any version here to roll forward or roll back to. So I'm going to go ahead and roll production back to, let's say, version, I think, 3, let's say. So I'm going to jump all the way back to version 3 from version 8. And all I have to do that rollback is say deploy, and I'm going to pick production and hit go. So this is going to go ahead and roll back from version 8 to version 3. If we had database components associated with this, we would incrementally roll back the database changes from 8 to 7 to 6 to 5 to 4 to 3. So we'll incrementally roll forward or roll back a database update as part of that process. So let's look at our timeline here. Just got going, so we'll wait a little bit as part of that. So while that is deploying out to version 3, back out to production, we're going to take a look at some of the other advanced features that we have in the Pro version. So let me go ahead and look at change requests. Like I said, in the Pro version, we're able to associate change requests. So this component, this application is rolling up from the component layer. We actually have 3 change requests that are associated with this. I could actually go out to that change request right from inside of DeployHub. So we have that link as well between those bug tracking tools as part of that. From here, we can look at other ways of viewing how change requests and burn down rates are associated. Let me go up to a release. So I have a release that we created. And a release is a set of applications that we're going to deploy together. So just like an application is a set of components, a release is a set of applications. In this case, we have 2 applications, the Salesforce application and our Uptime More application. So if we go to the change request here, we're pulling together the ones from rolling that up as well. Also, we can see at our planner level that we have different applications as part of this. So we have 3 open issues. I have nothing scheduled on my calendar here. I can actually go over to our calendar from this and do deployment, do entries and reserve time slots. Like I said, manage the calendar, do release planning from that aspect. So releases, the release planner, and the change request tracking is all part of the Pro version. Let's go ahead and go back to our version 7 here. Look at our timeline. I'm sorry, we did version 3. And that looks like it's out to most of the machines. Let's go out to production and do our refresh. And you can see that we've rolled back to build number 36. And our application is definitely different because of the wording here has changed, and our uptime is very short. It just came up 14 seconds ago. Now, so it makes it very easy for us to go forward or backwards. So if I wanted to jump to version 6, I can actually roll forward that to version 6 now. So we can roll forward or roll back just by picking and choosing. There's no need for us to update any scripts. There's no need for us to do anything manually as part of this process. We just pick and choose which version we want out in that environment. And DeployHub, because of its built-in versioning engine, is able to keep track of what's where and apply the appropriate changes to an environment. I think that was the main things that we wanted to show today. Oh, I do have one more thing. Let's go ahead and look at how we set up the connection between Jenkins and DeployHub. So we have a nice wizard. It basically asks you a few little questions. The domain. The domain is where in this hierarchy that I'm going to create. I've logged in with a developer ID, so I've actually limited my view to my pipeline domain. We're going to take that as the default domain that I'm going to create my application in. put in my Jenkins URL. Uptime more. And then we're going to go ahead and next. And then our target server. So I could say I'm going to deploy to tcdev. Actually, we'll just apply to the, give it the endpoint type. Like I said, we support many different endpoint types. This is a Linux machine. And because we're agentless, we have a choice of how we're going to communicate which protocol. So I'm going to use SFTP, and I'm going to deploy this into Tomcat Web App. And what the login credential is. So I'm going to use root, one of our default passwords there. And when I click finish, we're going to go ahead in the background and create this information. So we have our application that was created, our component, our endpoint, our build engine, our build job. So all this is the information that we need to populate on the Jenkins side. So let me go ahead and show you one that I have already completed. I'm going to go back to our first one that we started with, the uptime war. If you look at our configuration for this, go down to, so we have our build, and then we have our post build step, which is doing the archive, and then we get into the DeployHub interface. The information that we need, that we just generated, I would just cut and paste this across, is the target environment, the application that we're working with, where we're going to wait for the deployment to end instead of running in the background, and then information about what version. If I have an approved version, automatically create a new one for me, and then which components we're going to be working with, and then specific component attributes that I want to pass across. And that's all the information that we need in order to do a deployment. So less than 2 minutes, you're up and going with doing deployments with DeployHub and Jenkins combined together. The install process for getting DeployHub up and running is less than 10 minutes to actually do the install on a Linux machine. So the end-to-end up and running for a developer or dev manager or operations is going to be about 15 minutes to a half hour for them to start using DeployHub to do their deployments.
Get started today by joining the DeployHub open source community at deployhub.org. You can also learn more about OpenMake software by visiting us on the web at openmakesoftware.com.